Hey everybody, this is Tyler Dockery for GRD 280 Portfolio, and I teach design. Today we're going to talk about a portfolio that didn't make. We're going to talk about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how it could be changed. We're going to start off here with the cover. You'll notice that this portfolio has no cover. There is nothing to lead us into the piece. It just begin. This can have some problems, such as what if the cover gets scuffed up a little bit. And so we're just going to talk about the pieces as we move through here. As you can see, this starts off with an illustration, and the illustration is of our designer, and we can tell just right away that she has a style to her illustrations, and it's very straightforward. There's no problems with that. It gives us a little bit of information about her. In this piece, you can tell that she unfortunately has put a background color on her illustration, which means her illustration has a starting point and a stopping point, and the work comes almost all the way out to the edges here and here, but crisp, sharp edges on the outside line up in a way that's not exactly helpful to us. We see that her material up top starts out giving us some information about the designer, but we can also see that unfortunately she starts to use hyphenations directly in her work. Now, hyphenations are a big typographic no-no. There's no reason why you have to have that. She's got plenty of room, and if she ever decided that she wanted to change things, she could certainly go ahead and adjust and edit the type. This is her portfolio. Okay, moving into the first spread, we can see that this person has purchased a lay flat portfolio, which allows us to see the work. Um, I am always a little bit cautious about running the work across the gutter here because not every page in the portfolio lays down flat properly. Sometimes they need a lot of work, and sometimes this crease can become very visible in the work. Is it too visible? That's really up to you, and I suggest that each of you individually look at this material. Um, there is a very difficult sense of hierarchy here. What is the most important thing on the page for us to look at, and what is it that we look at first? More often than not, people look here first because of the high level of contrast. But that means that unfortunately, low levels of contrast elsewhere mean that it's difficult for us to tell where to start and where to stop. This tells us that we are looking at pop culture logos. You can see that a grid is started, but a secondary grid is put into place and a third grid. So we don't really have a clear sense of balance in this piece. All of this material seems to be over here on the left with large empty spaces on the right. Some items come with individual descriptions, others do not. So right away we start to see that one of the important things that we see in design is this idea of consistency. When we see something in one place, we should expect to see it in the same place again and again and again. However, that's not happening here, and it's causing us some problems. Is this the right amount of type for people to have here? Certainly, we could have that. It's really only 2 sentences, but it begins to look like a full paragraph, so make sure that you're using the proper size. Right away, we start to see that in the descriptions, the student is writing in here I. I updated them to make them more sleek and mainstream. When you use I in the portfolio, we know that you did this because it's your portfolio. I see we got a minor problem here, and I'm going to fix it for the next slide. We know that this is your portfolio, and we know that you did this work. You don't need to say the word I. We've got one logo here, we've got another logo here, we've got a third logo here, and a fourth logo there. However, we have 1, 2, 3 in situ uses. So some things are starting to work out, other things are not. The size of the circles in this typeface leads to some amount of readability issues, possibly. Overlapping and close type here does the same item. The connection between these two pieces are very difficult to make, whereas this one is slightly easier. It fits right into the spot. Unfortunately, the Korova logo here seems to have an emphasis on the outside stroke as the main point, which we can see as it gets slightly smaller in size, it starts to disappear completely. And I apologize, my dogs are barking outside. So we have a first page to get us started. Some items are cramped, other items have a lack of inconsistency. We don't see a solid grid to work off. And there are large open areas which lead us to believe that perhaps as a final piece, this was rushed and unready. We're going to move on to the next page here. I'm going to adjust this backdrop slightly. As we move into this next spread, we see that this is called hair care. We don't really get a good idea of who the client is for hair care. But we can see that, like before, some of the type is up here in the top corner of the page. But now our grid is starting to work a little bit better, so we start to feel pretty nice about what it is that we see. Over here, we see that our color blocks are lining right up with the center, but they're not going to the edge, so a crisp edge is seen between where this work is and where the edge is, and even where the shadow comes through. Probably would have been a better idea to make this picture a little bit bigger, or to zoom in on the pieces, or to spread these pieces out from one another so that we don't have this forced covering of the work, or possibly to include 1 to 2 additional pieces, maybe one here, the other there, that would fill up this space a little bit more. Now, the logo for this company is down here. You can see that it is gray and light gray on white, which makes it a readability issue, but the connection between this item here and these pieces are very difficult to understand. Here, when the logo is used for a particular product all of its own, we don't know what that product is. What is it for? Who is the audience? It's not exactly clear. Looking over at our 2 labels on the right, we see that this one has a label which comes all the way out to the edge. This one must be on white instead of this gray. But the white, of course, blends right into the background of the piece. If this happens, you should always put maybe a 60% gray at a lower opacity to show us where the ends are. This illustration here of frizzy hair and this illustration here of tight hair and buns, we can see kind of what to expect, although again, white on yellow has some readability issues for this foamy pineapple flavor. Silky beeswax is doing a little bit better, but the proximity in here and the proximity there are not exactly matching. So we're having some problems establishing a good, consistent location for items. Also, conditioner and shampoo are slightly different sizes in our labels, and you can see only a minor difference here, but a major difference here. Does that mean that it has changed prior to use on product? We don't know. One of the 4 items that we want to take into account when laying out our page is proximity. Here is the title, hair care. Here is the description. there's quite a large gap in here. Why is this gap so big? It is unclear. It might be that from one page to the next, they started with a particular spacing, maybe one like this. However, they did not move it from one page to the next, or they put it here as a placeholder, filled the type, and then ran out of time. The spacing that we see along this left edge and this left edge is not really helping us. Could these lines be longer or line up with this? They certainly could, but they do not. So even on this page where we're starting to establish a slightly different way of looking at the pieces, we start to find that not only are the inconsistencies still there, but a new set of inconsistencies are popping up. Let's go ahead and look over to the third page. All right, in this piece, we see that a movie campaign has been created. Maybe you've had a project like this in the past, maybe you haven't. So let's look at what we can see here to help us understand what they're showing us. First of all, we have a movie campaign. This lets us know who it is. We see some illustrations. We see how the illustrations are relate to the posters. We see the posters again, and then over here we see some additional ways that these pieces might be used. Maybe this looks like it's in good working order, but unfortunately, what we see realistically is that an additional change has been made, but once again, layout and grid aren't helping us. First of all, movie campaign. Where is the description about this item? It's down here on the next page. This is a problem because we do not normally think to jump from here all the way down to here and then go back through the piece to see our materials. Similarly, a second line over here doesn't really connect us between these two items. This item has a very distinct edge, but it's floating in all of this white space. So we're running into some problems with setting up a consistency with where items are, where they should be, and how we can note the importance of the text to them based on proximity. Over here, we see that she has used specialized illustrations. Now she's used specialized illustrations in the opening. She's used specialized illustrations in the logos that she's done. She's used specialized illustrations in the shampoos, and now she's using specialized illustrations here in the movie campaign. On one hand, this could be very strong because it continues to show the importance of these illustrations. But on the other hand, it doesn't tell us as much about her other abilities, such as how she can work with Photoshop or Illustrator or items along that line. Okay. These three posters use a similar method. They use the type, although the type is not always used in the same way. We have a centralized illustration, and we have a background gradient. This type down here is very difficult to see. I'm sure it's difficult to see where you are, but it's difficult to see in real life. She's using a compressed type, which is very, very, very tightly kerned to fill this in, and she's used the same one for each poster, so no harm, no foul. We start to see a spot illustration here, but not in these other pieces. We might have a hard time, we probably don't have a hard time understanding that this is a goat. Specialized eyes, very cool. We don't have a hard time understanding that this is a snail. This one could be a little tough, so she has shown that this is in fact a deer. Okay, so The spacing that they're using to set up this grid is inconsistent width to height, but pretty close. They're inconsistent one item to the next item. So that's a problem. They're inconsistent top of the grid to the bottom. They could have easily increased the size of this poster to make this grid a nice, easy piece. They could have just as easily reduced some of this piece so that it aligned with the bottom here. They could have used all three of the same gradient or three different gradients, but in fact they've only used two and used the second gradient again. This is easily seen over here where they're showing three of the pieces side by side by side with two similar and then one different by itself. They could have, if they wanted, put the different between the two, but they did not. So that's probably a poor composition choice. Bringing the white down into the white areas of the gradient makes it a little difficult for us to see these items from a distance. This is probably not the best choice for an in situ because it's underground, it's very far away, and all of these pieces are small in the photo. As a minor inconsistency, each photo has a reflection, but the reflections, of course, do not correspond with the images up top. This would come down in our pieces to a craft-related issue, something that we could certainly avoid. Over here, again, solid box edges, small items, inconsistent colors, no name on the product. Gray is not a fantastic color for food. I'm just going to be honest with you, it's kind of unappealing, like old hamburger that's been left out in the air. Similarly, large open white spaces here could have very easily incorporated maybe this swirling shell motif around the edges, little faces of the other Albee characters in here. But instead, these two pieces seem to be the graphics just kind of slapped onto the mock-up. And that leaves us with some problems. This text rolls right into the graphics here, and that's not real helpful for establishing a clear way for us to read this type. It's a nice start. They have an idea of what they're trying to do and how they want to go ahead and show it, but unfortunately they just run into some issues in how they can display it. Let's move on to the next piece. Okay, in this new piece we see this is called wine labels. Again, you can probably see that we run into some issues. Specific thing that I would like to kind of point out here is the item that we ran into before, which is the items in your portfolio are not about you. They're design work that you have created for a client. So anytime you use the word I, it's not about the client anymore. It is about you and what you've done, which is nice, but we already see what you've done. So let's talk about what we do see here. Wine labels for who? Why, it's this group, of course. How many of you saw that and said the name out loud to yourself? Karlechkin. Karlechkin? I don't know who that is. Anyways, I apologize, but if it didn't come across clearly and quickly to you the name of the wine, that could very well be a problem. So the label, of course, not here, but here. This tells us these stylish women were inspired by 1960s television programs in an effort to translate that specific style to a very unique style of wine. I illustrated two very different strong women. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 or 5 illustrations here, but only 2 labels. Where is the back with the required text by law? It's not here. That causes some problems because it means the project isn't complete. Why is this wine not on a mock-up? We don't know. Because we don't know, it causes some problems. We have these little names underneath the type, but it's difficult to see, and that causes us some problems. We have some materials down here, but they are different sizes and different locations, so it points out some inconsistencies. We see this woman and this woman are very similar except for the size of the stripe on the dress, and the missing dress over here may perfectly blend in with the exterior colors. Again, illustrations factor very highly into what it is that she needs. However, again, it's also not very clear about where this is going, what these bottles would look like. It's got large open spaces in here that seems like something was ready, but perhaps they just ran out of time. Are these the kinds of things we want people to be saying about us and our work in our portfolio? Absolutely not. All right, on this page, by the way, my dog is in here, so if you hear some heavy breathing, that's him running around. On this piece, we see 2 projects at once. So even though we have come to expect 1 project per spread, now we see that things are splitting into multiple projects at once. This is somewhat of a bad sign. Again, if we've come to expect something, every time you break it, that's a problem. So let's look at these individually. First of all, book cover is the name of this project, and music festival is the name of this project. Again, they don't really seem to be about the client. The size of book cover and the size of music festival are different than one another, and they do not align on the same grid. So they look out of place from one another. Over here we see some material. They start with the words I, and then a line comes up here, I chose the best photo and illustrated it. That is very clear. We don't need to state that multiple times throughout here. We've got a series of illustrations here. We've got a full graphic that doesn't appear in this project. We've got a photograph with an outline that comes right up to the top and cuts across with a slightly different color below. And then we have this illustration, The Story of Wren, written and illustrated by Desi Jackson. If this person says that they did this, they don't have to have the illustration mark below it. Also, just a point of remembrance here, is the person who wrote, whose portfolio you're looking at, is her name Desi Jackson? It is not. So when you note in your portfolio that this is a book and the book says it was illustrated by someone that's not you, that can open up questions as to whether or not you actually did this work or not. And you want that to be very specific. So they talk about here some extra stuff that was not put up next to one another, but we do see a widow here. Widows are bad news. This person probably just saw their salary at the job that she would get drop $5,000 to $10,000. Seeing one of these in your portfolio lets us know that another designer is going to have to stop what they're doing to look at your work and make sure that you are doing it properly. That means you're not doing work and they're not doing work, so they need to pay you less. Here we have a line, Wren has a friend named Kate, who is a mermaid, who lives on the land. This actually is a comma down here next to the E in Kate, but it looks like a period. Here is this illustration. Why is this illustration not shown in the book? It is unclear. Why do these items kiss one another? It's not clear. Because we have uh, a grid that doesn't seem to be working properly, because we have items shown that seem to be important but they're not shown in the work, it gives us an impression that this project may have been rushed, or they may have come to the class with an idea of, I like this photo, I'd like to see it turned into something, and then being told that the something that they did was not enough. We can't have a one-hit wonder. So here's the book. Where's the binding? Where's the back of the book? Where's the spread with this work in it? We don't see that stuff. So this project seems to look unfinished. All right, music festival. Chaos is a music festival concept for which I've created typographical posters and illustrations. We know you've created it. We see a hyphen right in here. Lend themselves to type, and one of the only appropriate venues to have fun with type. There's plenty of ways that you can use typography, so don't worry about whether things, a music festival is the only way. Here we see a large poster with several names of several very big bands in here. I don't know all of these bands. My guess is that whoever this person is, they probably don't want to be in dark and a shadowy edge. Green Day and Pearl Jam are also kind of falling off. Does Miley Cyrus really deserve to be with these groups? Is Carly Simon the right person for this? I don't know the answer to these questions, but maybe you do. You might be thinking to yourself, one poster done one way, one time, is not a campaign. You'd be correct. So looking over here, we also see two other tiny little posters. These colors are dark on a dark poster on a dark background. The same thing over here. Is this also one? It is difficult to tell. Maybe this and this are illustrations done by the designer. These other completely empty white sheets are probably not appropriate. Why is there so much empty space in this design? Again, might be a situation where to the designer it made sense, but now that it is shown, they didn't want to showcase that artwork, so they made it small and out of the way. We do have a nice grid being made here, but this one and this one don't match up, and this connection is really, really tenuous at best. Again, kind of looks like things got rushed at the end. Let's move on to the next page. Okay, this is an album release. Even though we've gone from a place where we had two projects back to back, now we've come to a place where the projects are a full page spread again. Is that appropriate? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe we like what we see here. Maybe not. Here we've got an album. The shirt showcases the album design. Here we've got a record sleeve. This illustration is very cool. I like this. I think it's very competent. I think it shows us a lot of good information. There's a big gap between these two again and long lines. Probably not a good idea. I constructed an album release and campaign is spelled incorrectly. They wanted the red hair to be very strongly red hair prominently on the album cover with a type-based emblem. So we've got some buttons down here with the red hair T-shirts seen here in red. Might be one of the stronger pieces in here. Again, it would be nice if this type were a little closer with the shirts. Um, you know, T-shirts and buttons are a staple for rock show genre. Collectible products and tend to increase in value over time. I agree with that. I think all three of these pieces are great. I would like to see this much closer up in the front of the book. Again, uh, we see that this illustration tends to pop out in here. Is this the best design typography? It's not bad at all. The illustration style isn't there, and we can kind of see a little bit of the photos and how that works with her materials. It's kind of a breath of fresh air. Okay, and as we get towards the back of the book here, we see a double page spread for photography. I like photography. I have taught photography. I've worked very closely with photography, and some things about photography really stand out to me. Um, this piece is one very nice long piece. um, and maybe it's done well in the ways that you would like to see it. Maybe these are sharply done, but they're kind of a medium value overall, and that means that things don't stand out very strongly. Are these the kind of pieces that tell us a story? Are they the kind of pieces that um, tell us about this designer's talent? Maybe so. Could this little piece of the photograph have been cropped out? Absolutely. Do all of these edges need to be here? I don't think they hurt it. But we have some over here and some over here, but not on every piece. It might be nice to kind of see where this could go. And here we are at the back of the book. No thank you. No information. Question. Do you remember the name of the person whose portfolio this is? And this is an even more important question. Suppose that you saw everything that you needed to see and you liked it and you wanted to hire this person. How do you contact them? Were there emails that you saw? Were there names? How about phone numbers? What's her website? Unfortunately, this information was not in this portfolio. So when we come to the end here, what is it that you can say about this designer? Number one, they definitely have an illustrative style and they don't mind putting it into a project. They may have some issues with mock-ups, but a lot of these projects seem to show some problems with typography or working on a consistent grid. It seemed like a lot of the projects in here were rushed and unready. Also, there were how many pieces? Did you count them? Let's look through them briefly. You know that photography cannot count as a piece, but it might be a nice number 9. Album release, number 1. Book cover music festival, number 2. Did you remember her name yet? Wine labels, number 3. Movie campaign, number 4. Hair care products, number 5. Pop culture logos, number 6.
Front cover. So, even for as big of a rush as she was in, and if you manage to put all of the pieces together, we're still shy of 8 pieces. Would you have given this person a pass for having a minimum of 8 campaigns? Unfortunately, because of that, she failed. Okay, I hope you've learned a little bit about what might stand out in a portfolio as something which is not meeting a set of standards. And think to yourself honestly, if you saw this level of portfolio work, what jobs do you think would be appropriate for this person? Maybe good things, maybe not. Maybe illustration work, maybe social media work, maybe content writing, design work, spot illustration. Think about it. All right, I've been Tyler Dockery, and I hope that you found this insightful. Thanks. Have a great day.